I'm going to record this, and then we won't spread it widely, but we'll see how it goes. So welcome. I think we should make a start. It's lovely to have you guys with us. Some faces we can see and some can't, and as I've said a few times now, but that's absolutely fine. It's nice to have you with us. As a church, we've been looking at this series about that we've called Faith in Our Bodies, and that was actually the backstory to that is that we were going to look at a Rowan Williams book as a church called Being Human, and Sam and Kath and I got it, and we started delving into it going, this isn't really lockdown friendly material. It's brilliant because Rowan Williams is a genius, but it was deep philosophy of what it is to be human and what is being and what is consciousness. And we could have done it, I think, on a Sunday morning and unpacked it on a normal Sunday, but when you just get 10-minute slot of something to talk about. So the takeaway bit that we took from looking at Rowan's book was that, isn't it interesting that as a church we rarely talk about our bodies, and yet our bodies are very important to us. So we've been doing this little series talking about the body, and I can see, Sam, I think you'll agree, Sam, that we found it quite tricky actually, because there's a lot to talk about, and yet we just have these little slots on a Sunday morning. And so we've done a couple of additional things. So last week, Jojo, I think I saw somewhere, and Jenny gave us some brilliant input about trauma in our bodies. And so tonight is a kind of extra bit to try and help add a bit of depth that we weren't able to on a Sunday morning, where we're going to be thinking about this subject that we're going to talk about tonight. So what we're going to do is we're going to keep to the hour, and to keep it sort of dead simple is I'm just going to give you a little thought to try and bring you into thinking yourself about this subject. And then I'm going to introduce Joe, and then I'm going to ask him some questions that I just sent him yesterday. And I'm not expecting us to go through all of those questions, but just gives us a little bit of a feel. Okay. And then when that's done, so there'll be some content for you to just listen to and reflect on, and then we'll give some space for you to ask questions. And what I think is a good thing is, if you're au fait with Zoom, that you can use the chat facility, and if you have any questions that spring to mind, even right now, that you'd like to ask, then put it in the chat thing. This isn't a kind of panel to ask, I don't suppose, but Joe's got a lot of wisdom. I can chip in, and it might be that there's other people who actually want to help us answer those questions. So you can ask anything that you like. But let me just introduce what we're going to be thinking about tonight. Some of you will know this book, I'm sure. Can you see that? Anam Cara, by the brilliant John O'Donoghue. And I read this book years ago, and I love it. And there was one bit that I remember just absolutely struck me at the time when I first read it, and it's no less kind of striking. Let me just read you. Let me read you this. It says this: "There is a presence who walks the road of life with you. This presence accompanies your every moment. It shadows your every thought and feeling. On your own or with others, it is always there with you. When you were born, it came out of the womb with you. With the excitement at your arrival, nobody noticed it. Though this presence surrounds you, you may still be blind to its companionship. The name of this presence is death. We are wrong to think that death comes only at the end of life. Your physical death is but the completion of a process on which your secret companion has been working since your birth. Your life is the life of your body and soul, but the presence of your death enfolds both." And I don't know whether I guess you knew what you were coming to tonight. I don't know whether that fills you with absolute dread and horror. I wonder if the kind of different generations represented here tonight, you have different feelings as you think about that. But this absolute truth, and there are very few absolute truths, aren't there? But this absolute truth that everybody involved in this call tonight is going to die at some point. And so it's one of the certainties that we have, and yet we have still so little certainty in how to think about it and how to talk about it and how to process it. And one of the most profound things in the last few years was a friend of mine, Jen, who some of you know, bought me a ticket for an event that was being put on by Brighton Festival a couple of years ago, this was now. And it was one of those slightly weird things where she said, I've bought you this ticket, so I didn't have any choice in whether I wanted to go or not. And what it was this classically Brighton Festival installation where you had to go first thing in the morning on a Sunday to a park in Brighton, and they gave you some headsets and a little listening, an iPod type thing, and told you to go and find a space in the woods and to lie down and to press play. And I had a bit of an idea what it was supposed to be, but I wasn't really paying very much attention. And I just liked Jen, and I said, oh yeah, it'll be fun. And then as I lay down in the woods, looking up at these trees, and I thought, what on earth have I let myself in for? And as I pressed play, for the next 50 minutes, it was a forensic piece of poetry, I suppose, about what would happen to you if you were to die at that moment. And so for 50 minutes, it went through what would happen to the breath, the last breath that left your lungs, what then happens to your blood as it sinks to the back of your body. It then took you through the process in which you would decompose. And by the time it had finished, your bones were calcified and were the only things that were left of you. And I don't think it was in the comedy stream of the festival, but I remember getting up from that and walking back down the hill thinking, wow, that was amazing. You know, this little glimpse of what happens to your body after you die. It was really, really beautiful and really brilliantly done. But the big question that I was left with was, where am I at this moment? You know, the thought of my body decomposing was really interesting. And because I'm into nature, actually the thought of my body decomposing into that particular piece of woodland is actually, I don't think it's legal, but I'd quite like them to do that with me. It was a really beautiful thought that I was going to return to the dust from which I came. But it didn't answer the question of where was Dave Steele, you know, where was I? And that question has rattled around my head a lot. And you'd have thought that I would have asked myself that question a lot, because I'm a Christian, I'm a church bod, and we like to talk about life after death a lot, but we don't talk about death very much. We might talk about life in all its fullness. We might talk about life after death, but what about this event of death itself? And so what I have done tonight is invited my friend Joe. Lots of you know Joe. For those of you who don't know Joe, I've known Joe a long time. How old's Mike, Joe?
He is 30.
Oh, wow. I have known you a long time, because my earliest memory of Joe was him inviting us round, and there was this little baby in a high chair thing being fed food, who then projectile vomited across the table. And Joe said he had a weak stomach, but he was throwing it some distance. So that's 30 years ago that Joe and I have known each other. So Joe, introduce yourself to us. And part of the reason that I've asked you to come is because you're a funeral celebrant, and that everybody here might know what a funeral celebrant does, but just give us a little bit of picture of what does your job involve?
Oh, okay, sure. So just to say, I'm based in Worthing. That's where I'm speaking from. I live here now. Dave and I knew each other from when we worked in London, Oasis. And I left church, sort of traditional church ministry, about 7 years ago. And I became a funeral celebrant, which means I do funerals for people if they want a little bit, people basically who don't want a vicar to do their funerals. Because, you know, I guess that's one of the cultural changes that has taken place. There was a time in our history in this fair land where a vicar would always do your funeral. But as people have sort of stopped going to church and stopped feeling they want a sort of heavily what they would call religious service. We might not like that word, but that's the language people understand. They don't want a really heavily, they want more of a celebration of life, perhaps. So a role has grown for something they call a celebrant, and people might say, we don't want any religion at all. We want a humanist or a sort of non-religious service. In fact, in point of fact, most people don't want a humanist service, and most people don't want, at this point, a very sort of religious kind of church service. They want something a bit in between. They actually do want to pray, or they might want to sing a hymn, or they might want, but they don't really want a big kind of thing. They want a sort of celebration of someone's life for the most part. So there's this sort of thing called a celebrant, and they do that.
Brilliant. And just give us some idea, in an average month, how many funerals would you do?
Well, I don't really quite know what an average month is, but probably one a day.
Okay. Yeah. Great. Well, thanks for your time, Joe. And the questions I'm going to ask Joe are in two sort of sections, or two thoughts, so that you know where we're heading. The first is I want to know myself really about the death of others. When other people around us die, I want to know. I want to glean Joe's advice on how we deal with that, and then obviously I want us to think about the death of ourselves. So in that sort of first part, Joe, the death of others, what's your experience as a celebrant who's around people who are mourning and grieving? What are the kind of common reactions and attitude that you come across to people when they're confronted with death near them?
It's tricky, but I mean, I suppose typically enough would be, I would say, denial and anger. Denial, people putting on a very cheerful front, we're coping, everything's fine, yeah, we're organising a funeral for this person, it's okay, tell us what you want, do that. You know, they're kind of not really, haven't yet had the space to really engage with the loss or the emotions. And bear in mind, most of my time is spent with people who literally the person has died in previous week. So that, they're at their early stages, or, sometimes anger. They're very raw.
And when you're talking to the families and you're preparing for that, what are the sort of soul-seeking questions that they're asking you, or do they not view you that way? Is it just more?
No, it really varies. Some people really do. They really are asking. And I don't know whether we get onto this, but I mean, I guess so many people ring up and they say, we don't want any religion at all. They're angry because God could have saved the person who's died, but didn't. And as a statement, they're really wanting to say, we do not believe in God. We don't want any religion. Of course, when you meet with them, you discover that they've got this awful notion of who God is. And maybe we're getting to the whole theological thing. God is Santa Claus in the sky who sits around, could heal people of cancer, but chooses not to because he's so mean. And, probably sitting up there judging people after they've died. And they decide, quite rightly in my view, that God doesn't exist. So when if and when it's appropriate, sometimes it is appropriate, sometimes it isn't. It just depends what, you're sensitive to each situation. There's no real template. We've got to prepare a service. But if people are asking questions, I might say, actually, you are right, that God genuinely doesn't exist.
Yeah. And what do you see in terms of the kind of common, I wrote mistakes, maybe that's a bit of an unfair phrase, but what are the common sort of negative behaviours that people have around death, do you think?
Are we talking about the bereaved people or the people supporting the bereaved?
Yeah. So I'm thinking about for any of us here who perhaps are aware, have lost people during lockdown even. What I really want to get to is, how do we do that well? How do we grieve well? But I wonder, the sort of flip side of that is do you see families, what would be the difference in your head, between a family or a group of people who are doing the grieving process well and others that are making mistakes?
Well, I think I think some of us don't, a lot of us don't have particularly great, what's the word? Is it EQ, emotional intelligence? So we're not good at voicing, we're not good at expressing, particularly sadness. And obviously bereavement is like one of the saddest times of our lives. So I think, you go into a mode when someone has died, and the mode you go into is, well, I've got to organise a funeral. So, I'm often seeing people at the sort of that stage. So they sort of seem okay, but actually it's after that stage. And very often a funeral is the point at which they have first allowed to grieve. And so I think the difference, if I can answer the question, the difference between healthy grief and unhealthy grief is genuinely about its expression. You have to somehow get it out. And culturally, we are, I know this might come later on your questions, but we're going to have to cross over a bit, I'm afraid. But like culturally, we are a kind of nation of stiff upper lip. We don't want people. So you always have people who were like, when I'm perhaps talking to them, they might go, just suddenly they say, I want a hymn, or I want this poem. And then they start crying. And then they stop and go, I'm so sorry. Like, crying is a terrible thing to do around. Well, how ridiculous that I lost control for a moment. I must immediately apologise for shedding a tear. How awful that you've had to deal with me when I've expressed emotion. So, part of what I'm doing when I'm visiting families is just go, look, here's what's going to happen in this meeting. It's the same as probably what's going to happen in the service. We're going to laugh, we're going to cry, we might get angry at some point to get, it's all okay. What's not okay is just sort of allowing it all to go on in here. Sorry, lift up in here, and not expressed. Unexpressed grief, I think, is the really dangerous thing. It's the thing that messes with us the most. Because once you've expressed it, you can start to deal with it. But all the while it's unexpressed, it's like this festering thing, like unforgiveness and everything. It's like cancerous.
And you and I have both been pastors as well of a church, and it's
you still are technically, Dave, to be fair.
I think I am. Yeah, I think I am. They don't pay me enough. No, they do. But the thing, I think you and I have talked about this before, is that nobody ever trains you.
No.
You go to any Bible college or whatever you've gone through, or I studied theology, and at no point do they say, this is how you behave when one of the people in your church or one of the people you love drops dead. And I've been there on numerous occasions and been there with people's final breath, and how you behave then and what you say in the awkwardness of the intimacy of that grief is, I almost don't know myself, because you just have to be there because each situation is unique. But in general, Joe, how do we support grieving people best? What would be your advice?
Well, again, it's really hard to be, to make any one-size-fits-all statement there. But generally speaking, to acknowledge things, to talk about it to the level that is comfortable for people. The worst thing is not talking about it. So, I will often go into people's houses. It depends on the setting. Just go, well, this is shit, isn't it? I mean, because it is. It's terrible. Someone's just lost a partner that they've devoted their lives to. It's worse than losing a limb. It's not like losing a limb. It's worse, I imagine, than losing an arm or a leg. These people are devastated. So just to acknowledge the sheer loss, I think, is really important, without projecting onto them how they must be feeling or anything, because you don't know how they're, because you might be catching them in various stages of the many feelings that come during the grief process. But acknowledging, giving space, reassuring people that it's okay to express emotion, it seems to me is a really important thing. Reassuring them it's okay to be angry.
Mm.
Again, that's another thing we're really pretty uncomfortable with, isn't it? Especially in the church, because Jesus told us not to be angry. So therefore it's wrong if I'm angry that someone I love has died. There's that confusion over what is appropriate and when is it appropriate to be angry. And so, we've got these sort of, now someone we love has died, we're dealing with emotions we're not sure if it's okay to have. So one of the ways we can support people is to say it definitely is okay to be feeling this way. And if you feel numb and you feel nothing, that's okay. That's the stage as well. So allowing people to be how they are, because how people process grief is individual as there are people. There's no kind of set way. And I know we have our sort of 5 stages of grief and everything, but it's not linear anyway.
Do you think, and then we'll move on to the second part, but do you just, when I was in London particularly, every funeral I did was from a different culture. And there was a fascinating thing, particularly some cultures that do that wailing, that actually it's rude not to.
Yeah.
And you kind of prove your love for I remember sort of women looking like they were fainting at the graveside, and being worried for them, but just being sort of whispered to say, no, they're fine. But this is part of a cultural thing. Equally, I feel so jealous of, I think in Judaism, they talk about sitting Shiva, you have to say very carefully. But when you sit Shiva, this idea that it's a cultural thing to sit in silence with people who are grieving. And, you and I are very similar, that we talk a lot. I find that really hard. But I just wonder if you had any experience of seeing practical things that we can do, because everything you just said was about allow people to do this, talk to them about that, but the presence of being with people.
Well, I don't think this just applies to grief. I just think the best thing you can ever give anyone is your presence, your attention. And I think when you are really tuned into the room and not on your phone half and not when you're actually with someone, I think you can probably trust your intuition as to whether it is appropriate to sit in silence or whether it's appropriate to say a word or two and everything, and there is definitely a season for both of those things. Friends learn to be comfortable with silence, doesn't it? That's one of the ways you're with a friend, is like neither of you have to make an effort. It's okay to just be together, even if you're not telling each other jokes or whatever you're doing. There's times to tell each other's jokes. There's times just to sit in silence and be present to one another. So I don't know how different grief is to that. I want to help people, deal with grief well. But what I can't do is prescribe the model for which you deal with grief. I think it's, developing your own character so you are comfortable and good with people.
Yeah. And I think, my 2 P's worth would be just about that, getting over the fear of entering that space or opening your mouth. And I know of people who come to me and go, no one in the church, no one in my small group has talked to me about the death of my parents.
That's the worst thing people can do.
Yeah.
Because it feels, I think, speaking to people for whom they've said exactly the same thing. No one talks about it. We're so afraid of upsetting stuff. What if I say to you, how are you doing? I'm so sorry about the death. What if you then burst into tears? That's my fault. And I don't want to upset you and everything. Like, we feel like but actually, that's not a bad thing.
No.
So, express care, concern, love. That's your responsibility in that.
Yeah. Well, chuck in any questions to do with kind of that and about grief and how we help others. And I know there's some people who I know well here who are 1,000 times better than me and more qualified to talk about that. So any advice?
And me, to be fair.
Yeah, possibly.
I'm just a has-been Baptist minister, as you well know.
Yeah. You're proper Baptist minister. Let's just shift to this more personal thought, Joe, about the death of ourselves. I want to get into the meat of it, but I'm just tempted.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's go deep. Let's go dark.
Well, I think there's got to be two places that you want to avoid, isn't it? One is that you you never think about your own death, and you never talk about it, and you never talk to loved ones about it. The other is that it is a shadow upon your daily life, and it steals joy from you. So again, just what do you think is the right place for us to sit, Joe? And it might be different for people, but in general, how do you think we should approach thinking about and talking about our own death?
I definitely think we should do it. Because, I mean, again, you know, this is that kind of uncomfortable. None of us know if we're going to be alive tomorrow. I mean, we don't. Some of us watching this could, you know, something could happen overnight. We could be in an accident. We could have a fatal heart attack. None of us know. And, you know, there's this sort of, you know, we think we have a right to life. But my goodness, I have gone weeks when every funeral I've done is for people younger than me. I'm 55, by the way. And it's hard. Well, I've done 1 week where every funeral I did was people younger than me. I've done funerals for babies. I've done funerals for children. I've learnt that cancer is no respecter of age whatsoever. And yeah, kind of the majority of people in their 80s and 90s maybe. But make no mistake, people are, you know, people die. And we are going to die. So I think we've got to sort of remove some stigma from the thing. How often you speak about it is probably important. I mean, I try to go on retreat a couple of times a year. And I often think about it then. There was that old management exercise. I mean, you must have gone on these kind of courses where you had to write your own eulogy. You know, like you had to imagine your own funeral and what people would be saying about you. And the idea is that it made you live better in the present. But actually, as corny as that sounds, it's not a bad idea. Yeah. Because, and again, you seemed slightly resistant to this idea when I said I wanted to talk about it, but I really think the theology matters here.
Sure.
I really do think it's a very important thing, because I feel totally at ease with death. And personally, I think it's much easier to come to terms with your own death and dying than it is of people you love.
Can I interrupt you there, Joe?
Yes.
Because I think that's what you just said is interesting. You said that you're at ease with your death, but are you at ease with dying? You know, how do you feel?
Well, I mean, I'm not looking forward to the process of it. You know, I think you know, I see people dying. Sometimes I'm with dying people because they want to arrange their funeral. They don't want their, you know, they don't ask their relatives to arrange it, right? So, you know, they want to organise their own funeral, which I completely respect. Well, I to be honest, I used to worry about it, and I genuinely feel I don't worry about it now. But if you caught me on an off day, perhaps I would worry about the act of dying. I mean, who's going to look forward to that? But I just feel like I accept that there's that birth bit, which I didn't have much control over, and there's that dying bit, which I won't have much control over. And for me, death and resurrection, it's just all in the play all the time until the physical death and resurrection. So I kind of think, you know, if you take those scriptures seriously, you know, there's got to be a fair amount of dying in this life anyway. We I guess should we? We are dying to things. We're dying to our egos. We're dying to all those sort of things anyway. So we're sort of used to the process. And then there's this kind of physical death and resurrection. And why should we worry about that? And for me, you know, this is we'll spin off into this in a little bit. This is the glorious thing about science and physics and everything we're learning about the universe. Stars die, they collapse in one another, they burst into life again. We are all, I mean, you know, you talked about that exercise at the beginning about lying in your own sort of grave, because that is an exercise. You know, what science is telling us, and with apologies to those who believe in a literal kind of 6-day creation, what science is telling us is that all the atoms that comprise us were once stars, and in about 8 billion years time, you know, those atoms will be a star again. Either Andromeda crashes into us in 8 billion years time, but our sun will have certainly burnt out by then. And so there's a kind of coming to terms with all of those things. And we get into the theology in a bit. What was the question, Dave? I'm starting to get excited, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's good. I think I just before we go down that road, you sort of led us down a bit. Let's just ignore faith.
Sorry, rein me in.
No, because it's good. But I want to just continue the thought of talking about death.
Yeah.
What does that mean? What might that look like? How do you think we should do that well? Is there anything sort of practical? Because I like to go away and do something. Yeah. If something's been helpful, is it to, what age do you talk to people around you about your funeral?
I don't know.
As me to think about my funeral.
But not long after starting to be a celebrant, I said to Rachel, "Here's what I want at my funeral." So I've written it down. I want the music.
How did she receive that?
I think she laughed, as I recall. But we do talk about it. We revisit. I can tell you some of the music Rachel's having. It doesn't feel like a really morbid thing to do, but just a genuine coming to terms with the fact that, God willing, we'll be around, both of us, for another 20, 30 years, but or perhaps even longer. Who knows? But we both know that might not be the case. And if the worst did happen, it would kind of be nice to know what it was I wanted at my funeral. So it's on a sheet of paper in this very filing cabinet, which you can't see just to my left. So,
and what about...
I don't know. So I think that there's something at a very sort of peripheral level you can do. I actually think the more helpful, deeper work of really coming to terms with peace is as we start to articulate together who we believe God is, what we believe God is, who we really are, and in the light of that, I personally feel we can really come to a much more peaceful place over death.
Okay, let's go down that road then. So as Christians, or as whatever people want to call themselves, but predominantly because I know enough people here that we're probably happy ish with that moniker. What difference do you think it makes to us in the here and now to be people of that faith? And is fear of death a lack of faith?
Well, yeah, in a way, yes, I do think that, but not in a way as a stick to beat you up. I think that some atheists might be far more calm about death than a lot of Christians, because I don't think it's whether you have faith or not. I think it's what kind of faith you have, and I definitely think it's to do with your notion of God. So so let's just take a kind of real hardline evangelical line. Let's say. Let's say I haven't said the prayer, I haven't asked Jesus into my heart, I haven't asked him for forgiveness. I'm going straight to hell, kind of thing. So bad. But equally, bad for you that is your notion of God. Because imagine the life you have lived, the fear you have lived under through your life, believing in that kind of God. You see, I personally just don't think we should be afraid of death. I think we should be afraid of not living. We can pontificate about the afterlife, and Christians love to do that. And in all honesty, and with the greatest respect, so much junk, so much mythology taken literally, so much, just kind of wishful thinking. And, in heaven, we can eat as much chocolate as we like and we don't put on weight. And, it's this kind of lovely idea. Okay, great. But this morning, did you tell the people you loved them? Did you really taste the first cup of coffee? Or were you in such a hurry you just missed that moment totally? Did you hear the birds singing on the way to work this morning? Or were you so worried and in your head that you tuned everything out? you know, did you smile at the person on the street who looked a bit depressed and worried? Did you greet people and really mean it because if you didn't, you weren't living. Were you with your kids today, or were you checking your phone all the time? You know, and sometimes I think we've so overemphasized the eschatological ending that we've missed the real point, which is to live now. And actually living fully now will give you a peace with death.
Yeah. And I guess it's a consequence of perhaps the more we talk about our deaths, then maybe the more we live now. Do you think that's true?
I think it can be. I think it can be. I have friends who really worry about death, and it's a real nerve for them, and perhaps they haven't had a safe environment to work about it, and perhaps they've got a real fear of who and what God is. So that's the kind. Now we've got to get into that.
Yeah. And we'll have questions from people. So be thinking about any questions that you might want to ask. And you can do that by unmuting yourself and asking, or you can do it by chat. But just one last thing from me, Joe, because I think there is a slight elephant in the room, in that generally, and this isn't always true, but generally, pain, suffering, disease, dementia, will come before our death.
Yeah.
And so we're talking about the final breath and whether you should be fearful of that. I'm not fearful of that final breath. You know, goodness knows what's actually going to be like after I die, but I know that I'm trusting that I'll be held in the arms of a loving God, and I won't be disappointed for a moment. However, I am fearful about 3 or 4 or 10 years of dementia, of sitting in a chair with nobody visiting me, you know, and that's surely a rational fear. And how do we hold that as we think about
it? Well, own your fear of it. Talk about your fear of it. Maybe that's it. I mean, what you're helpfully doing is distinguishing between a fear of death and a fear of dying. I think I think I've got some answers on the death thing. I think the fear of dying is much more messy because, like you say, I mean, I've seen dementia close up. I know you have as well. It's horrible. I don't know for the person involved how awful it has been. For me, my fear around dementia is what it would do for Rachel and my kids. You know, and you say these things, don't you? Like, oh, just, you know, put me down, or, you know, like really unhelpful things that actually don't help anyone or anything. It's a lovely sentiment. What you're saying is, I don't want you to go through pain and suffering of watching me lose my mind. But of course, they love you and they'll do everything they can for you to make sure you're comfortable. So, you know, I think all I can do is say, I'm a bit scared of that, and you know, it's kind of scary and rough. And if that's my path, that is my path. But you know, in this, my existence for the first 13.8 billion years of the universe seemed okay. I don't remember it. This existence has been good to me for 55 years. You know, if maybe the next 13.8 billion years contains a few years of dementia, perhaps in the big scheme of things.
Okay.
So I feel a bit easier about
it. We'll take some questions. And it might be that you just want to pause and reflect on those a bit. A couple of questions have come through, and I'm not going to say who asked them because I think that's probably good. But 2 different people have asked about euthanasia or assisted dying. I don't know if you have any personal experience. Not that you've done it, but any personal experience through
killed anyone recently
through your celebrancy or in your pastoral stuff. But just that's a tricky one. But what do you think, Joe?
Well, I know the pro-life answer I'm meant to give, so let's just be clear about that. Honestly, you know, if I was in mind-numbing pain and losing my mind and distressing my family, I think I'd probably, like it as an option, to be brutally honest. I'm not saying it's right, or, the ethics. I'm just saying what it would naturally be like. And, it is a really grey area, I think. And, I appreciate laws to protect the abuse, because can you imagine? And like, we haven't talked about this, but families go weird for inheritance, right? I mean, the fighting and the arguments that happen. I mean, we haven't talked about writing wills and being fair, but man, to watch families disintegrate around wills and inheritance and stuff like that. So I'm pretty grateful for the laws that are in place that mean families can't decide, to be honest. But do you really want to generalize? Can you not have compassion? Can you look at individual cases? That's a tough one.
And do feel free to contact me around the whole issues of legacy and will.
Yeah. Dave, you're not in mine, mate.
Oh.
I love you.
Those binoculars, come on, let me have them.
Get your own.
So yeah, and I appreciate two different people asked that question, and that was a fairly sort of short answer, and you might want to come back and ask more specifics. But isn't it interesting for those of us, I'm trying to avoid using the word baggage, but let's just go with it, the baggage of growing up in church, and yet I can see various nodding heads going, do you know what? If I'm in abject...
No, I know. And I just...
going.
Well, I feel it's similar to the whole abortion thing, to be honest. Like, I am, white, middle class, comfortable man. What right do I have to say to anyone about that? No, I have principles that I hold to. I have values about the sanctity of life, but I just feel like, I don't know what it's like to be diagnosed with a disease that is going to gradually destroy all the muscle in my body and maybe my ability to think coherently, and is just going to destroy me. And those around me are going to love me and support me and go through the agony with me. I don't know what it's like to then pronounce, no one is allowed to help you die. I had a doctor.
A very different question, Joe, but again, some of this is about the baggage that we carry. And someone's asked the question about that it's a very tempting evangelical prayer to pray for the Lord to come back in my lifetime so that I don't have to experience death. But we're many generations in, and there are many dissatisfied saints that the prayer didn't come true for. What do you think about that?
I think the Lord has come back. Oh, do you want more? I don't.
You were just flattering me, Dad.
I don't think the Lord has just come back once. I think the Lord comes back over and over and over and over again. I don't think it's just a one-time off event. So I know there's a literal interpretation, and we know where he's going to come. He's going to come to the Mount of Olives. Somehow everyone's going to see it, although, my kind of science mind says, how does that work when the globe is round and not flat? So, there's going to be issues there. But
I was with you until you said the globe was round. No,
no,
being controversial.
Christ continually returns over and over and over again. So,
okay.
I know. I mean, behind that question is a real, have we got to get our prison free card if Jesus comes on, the 22nd of July, then we haven't got to worry about all this. But I mean, personally, and here's the alley we're going to go down. And actually, I understand that you can't go down in an evening conversation, because the story of my life, just to say this, has been a process of deconstructing all those kind of fragments that we put together to a systematic theology, because it just didn't make any sense to me ultimately. So I now have a different interpretation about what the eschatological arguments, just like I have a different view of creation.
Okay. Would anybody like to ask a question like by unmuting themselves and asking the question?
Can I? Well, okay. Yeah, good.
Let's just pause for a second and
you have to be careful not to pick your nose on these things.
Go for it, Joe.
Well, no, all I was going to say is, like, you've had the chance to ask me lots of questions and everything, but I haven't necessarily had a chance just to say some controversial things that I like to do.
Yeah.
But, you know, with this sense of, like, I love that you asked me to do this, and thank you so much. But of course, the illusion you create is that I'm some sort of expert on death, which I'm not. I'm just a funeral celebrant. That's it. But I always think we say goodbye with hope, because my view of the divine has changed so much. You know, my wonder of God is so much bigger than it used to. My appreciation of who God is. This idea that we live and breathe and have our being in God, that God sustains the whole, that the Christ energy, the Christ power energizes the whole universe, that there's no place in the universe where God isn't, because God is. That changes my view on death. Because, you know, I now, you know, what the glory of modern science is, it starts to tell us the truth about our metaphysical reality. So, you know, and, you know, we were all together 13.8 billion years ago in a tiny thing they call a singularity, and the universe bursts into being. And so then the atoms are, you know, flung into space and form stars. And, you know, on the 2nd of March 1965, those same atoms that were once stars came together in space and time to form me. Who am I? But the chance of my existence is so infinitesimally small. I mean, trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions to one. And yet here I am with this gift of life. I don't know how long it's going to go on for. But I know I've learned by the age of 55 that I don't want to kind of spend my life checking emails or Facebook, or, you know, I want to watch storks with you at NEP. I want to see the butterflies that are out in July. You know, it's, you know, there's so much beauty in the world. We are often tempted to talk about what a terrible and dark place the world is, and some of that is true, but there's so much beauty as well. And, you know, beauty in the people who are around us. So I do think there's like another view on life, and that the day is coming when my physical atoms, I will die in the way that Joe Davis is formerly known. My physical atoms will become dust again, and eventually, as I say, in 8 billion years, a star again. Who knows what incarnations lie beyond that. But I trust in this biblical narrative that whatever heaven is, and I'm afraid I just can't join in with those conversations. They're fun to speculate what heaven's going to be like and our second bodies and all. You know, I know people love to talk about. My simple trust is that I will be abiding in God just as I always have done. I will be abiding in God. My consciousness, I don't know to what extent it's separate, to what extent it's absorbed into the life of God, I don't know. But I love that passage in John, that metaphorical language of abiding in God. And that's my destiny, and that's where I'm going. And so, you know, Jesus is knocking that kind of fear on the death. I mean, you know, not fearing is such a critical statement, isn't it?
And Joe, you might have answered a question that Miriam's asked. So Miriam, come back if Joe hasn't answered that last question about what happens. Oh, thank you. She says you just did. So you're not allowing us to pin you down to, but what actually do you think will happen after? Let me ask you
the only reason I won't is because nobody knows.
Of course, yeah.
Only one person we trust has come back from the dead, or if you could include Lazarus, technically. But either way, neither of the people are around to question about it. You know, Jesus of Nazareth is not here now to join the Zoom and tell us what it was like when you were dead and what it's now like. So everything anyone says about it is pure speculation. And just like with creation and all the other doctrines in the Bible, are you going to start taking metaphorical statements literally? You know, is it going to be a city? You know, there's so many questions. There's so much, and I just think the trouble with that kind of, if I might, you know, don't want to judge it too much, but sort of pointless conversation is it will stop you living now.
Yeah.
Live now. Look out the window at the clouds. You know, look.
Let me just ask you a good sort of theological question then, Joe, and then we'll see if there's any other questions. But what difference did the resurrection of Christ make then, and does it make to you and your thoughts about what happens after death?
Well, I think for one, Jesus never asked anyone to worship him. You know, the deal was you follow him.
Mm-hmm.
And if you love people the way Jesus loves people, you are going to end up confronting power and control and domination, principalities and powers, if you want to use Bible language, darkness, oppressive systems. And that's going to get you killed. I mean, a worst case scenario, you give you a load of persecution, and in the end, some people who insist on standing up to corrupt and unjust powers will get themselves killed. And the story of the resurrection says, death ain't the last word. It's still the right way to live. So there's one important thing that the resurrection means to me.
We need to sort of go towards any questions that you haven't had a chance to ask. Either unmute yourself or drop that chat in if you like. Joe, I'm going to feed you a line here, but I think you know the thing I'm talking about. But did you ever see that Dallas Willard? I think it was the last sort of video conversation he had with John Ortberg, and he knew he was dying.
Beautiful.
Do you want to just? It might be quite a nice place to finish. Just tell us.
What he was suggesting is that after you have died, it might take you a little while for you to realize that you've actually died. Like this glorious, continuous life. You know, it's like a continuum, death and resurrection. Like I said, we've already been used to that loop. I mean, and again, metaphysically in our bodies, millions of cells have died today. You know, we ought to be dead, but for the fact millions of new cells have generated themselves. The death resurrection pattern is in the universe, it's in our bodies, it's part of our existence. The day is going to come. You know, I wasn't aware of those cells dying in my body today because new cells were being generated. And Dallas was just talking about this lovely, he just had this view of his death that, you know, perhaps we're just going to cross over the other side and we're suddenly going to realize things seem a little bit different. What's going? Ooh, I died. That's what it's like. Which I thought was beautiful. Is that what you meant?
Yeah, it's exactly that. My interpretation maybe was slightly different because I was looking at a guy full of grace, full of
beautiful.
You know, in his 80s, I guess, was he? And I was thinking, if I died today, I wonder whether I would have the same confidence that, because I think
absolutely
would feel very different because I felt like there was a man who was completely at peace with who he was, with loving relationships, forgiving relationships, and so therefore life with God in a more prescient sort of way wouldn't jar and would feel more natural. So that gave me kind of a goal, if you like, to go, I would like to die and not know that I've died.
If we can we post that video up? Because I know it's around on YouTube.
Yeah, we should do. That would be great. I said I'd keep it to an hour, and we try to. I try and keep my promises. So we're done.
I'm sorry if I've been a bit over the, you know.
No, and it's partly why I asked you because I knew you'd give us lots to think about.
Thank you.
And so really grateful for your time. That's really kind of you, and for you being honest with us about this stuff that isn't always easy to talk about. But
yeah, and there's not a million people here, so if anyone wants to get in contact with me, please get in contact. You know, you can give them my email. It's fine.
And I, you know, want to just bring us back to where you know, some of the more pragmatic stuff of what we talked about. You know, let's be the people who come alongside the grieving and who are not frightened to be around those people who are fearful of death. Let's be those accompaniers and be present to people, and let's talk about our own deaths, and let's talk about that with people who it's appropriate to do that. I'm convinced that your, if nothing else, your mental health, your money you're going to save further down the line on counselling, and just generally your appreciation of life, I think will be enhanced by you not being frightened to talk about death. I'm going to read something to us as we finish, which is, I just love this, by someone called Padraig Ó Tuama, that some of you know, and this might seem like it's got nothing to do with death, and I just felt prompted to read it as we sort of finish. It's partly because I'm really tired and could really do with a good night's sleep, and this is called the Liturgy of the Night. And so let me just read this to you as a kind of poem, as a prayer, that you will have peaceful evenings as you continue to chew and contemplate on this stuff. So let me just read this to you as we finish. On the first night, God said, "Let there be darkness." And God separated light from dark. And in the dark, the land rested, the people slept, and the plants breathed. The world retreated, the first night, and God said that it was good. On the second night, God said, there will be conversations that happen in the dark that can't happen in the day. The second night, and God said that it was good. And on the third night, God said, let there be things that can only be seen by night. And God created stars and insects and luminescence. The third night, and God said that it was good. And on the fourth night, God said, some things that happen in the harsh light of day will be troubled. Let there be a time of rest to escape the raw light. The fourth night, and God said that it was good. And on the fifth night, God said, there will be people who will work by night, whose light will be silver, whose sleep will be by day, and whose labour will be late. And God put a softness at the heart of the darkness. The fifth night, and God said that it was good. And on the sixth night, God listened, and there were people working, and people crying, and people seeking shadow, and people telling secrets, and people aching for company. There were people aching for space, and people aching for solace. And God hoped that they'd survive. And God made twilight, and shafts of green to hang from the dark skies, small comforts to accompany the lonely, the joyous, the needy, and the needed. The sixth night, and God said that it was good. And on the last night, God rested, and the rest was good. The rest was very good. And God said that it was very good. Thanks so much for joining us, everybody. So lovely to see you. God bless you, and hope to see some of you again soon. Take care. Cheers. Bye-bye.